Psychic attacks can be enough to make anyone lose their mind. Most people try to deal with psychic attacks one at a time. They clear the attack, they recover, and then it happens again and again. What people don't understand is that as long as the underlying attachment mechanism exists, the attacks will keep coming. You have to understand why this is even possible in the first place and fix the root cause. I'm Tracey and I've spent the last decade commanding and releasing demonic and multidimensional entity interference at the highest levels. I've been in a place where psychic attacks nearly cost me everything, and I literally wrote the book on it. In this episode, I'm walking you through how to detach from a psychic attack at the root, so you can stop the cycle and reclaim your mind, your health, and your life. I see this time and time again. People under psychic attack and they're working in damage control. So what do I mean by that? I mean that they're looking at it as an isolated incident. It is not an isolated incident. I guarantee it will be a repeat reoccurrence based on a past engagement or a past energetic program, or it's like the setup exists before that point in time. So people are looking in the wrong place for one to start with. And there is so much misinformation in the marketplace when it comes to entity interference. And that the biggest one would be the myth around protection. Oh, I just have to protect myself more. It's not about protection at all. When people have issues with entity interference, it is long-standing, and a lot of people don't understand that the creation may have even been at birth. It may have come through inherited influence, a relationship dynamic from childhood, almost like we get pre-programmed through our childhood with certain beliefs, with certain energetic programs. I'm going to come back and just kind of elaborate more on what I'm talking about a bit later by referencing different scenarios or different stories so you understand what I'm talking about. But if you look at something in isolation, you're never going to basically be able to heal or address the underlying cause of why that scenario can take place, because energetics are really obviously at the end of the day to blame, right? And how do energetics work? We simply run an energetic kind of attachment, a mechanism. Our energy says one kind of level of ordering, and that's what is shown to the universe, right? Or to your environment. So it kind of comes down to manifestation at the end of the day, right? And there's this attachment mechanisms where things can attach and then cause restriction for you. So psychic attack is horrible. Believe me, I have been on the end of it. In fact, my whole journey that I talk about in my book, I talk about all the things that I had to deal with. And for a long time, I didn't understand how it worked. And I kind of had this, I don't know, I did have a mantra that was, when you're going through hell, don't stop. And I just had to keep going and keep going. But as I was going through and having to deal with one attack after another, it brought the opportunity to understand entity interference in a deeper way, in the correct way, right? Because protection is a complete myth. Even just what is being taught in the marketplace, there's no understanding it in a deeper way. And conscious awareness is actually key to elevation and transformation. Conscious awareness is the first step to change and transformation. So understanding it in a deeper way and understanding the stories or the connection points that actually made that scenario possible, you can actually focus on the right thing in healing. And throughout my journey, I had to learn the hard way. For me, honestly, at points in time, it was terrifying. And I had to navigate these realms without understanding. And there was kind of that poor me, woe is me kind of talk. There was, oh my God, I can't. But it's almost like I didn't understand the role or, the power that I had to start to shift and change these openings or these connection points or these loopholes in order to stabilize my connection, so there was no room for entity interference to keep coming back and attacking me. And again, the pathway is always elevation. The pathway is spiritual authority, and to even work at that highest level of reordering with entity interference, because believe me, entity interference is vast and it goes hand in hand with all blocks and restrictions. You have to have something called governance. You have to be able to command. But as I said, it took me a long time to understand this. And I even at one point developed PTSD through my journey, and even a phobia. And so it was terrifying. It's like I had to step up again and again within these realms, being scared, kind of having to pretend like I wasn't, but to be honest, I was. Took me a long time to get a handle on it, to understand the mechanisms, the mechanics behind it, the different types of interference, and where was the elevation that I could control. And so when I tell some of these stories, maybe in story it makes a bit more sense. And, people will come through to me. Like one of the most common stories I hear, right? One of the most common stories is people may have joined like a spiritual teaching, a spiritual modality or something like that, and they're involved for a while, and then they start to notice cracks, or they notice that maybe the teachings aren't as aligned to them, or potentially they've noticed interference, even maybe with the spiritual teacher. And when they go to say, hey, sorry, this isn't aligned with me anymore and I want to leave, they're kind of granted permission in a sense, verbally, through the person, through physicality. But I always say, if you offend someone or make someone mad, you don't worry about the person. You don't worry about the person. You worry about what's attached to them, because that's the real cause of the suffering, of the attack, of the interference. And so you have to, one, understand that. Potentially, don't get me wrong, there is people that are doing awful things, even like witchcraft, blood magic, all of these different things. I talk about it in my book. So there are people that are intentionally placing restriction on a person, right? And that, that's a whole nother kind of story again. But there's also other people that don't understand even what they are connected to at that darker alliance. They've made agreements, maybe for spiritual development, many other reasons, but they themselves potentially do not consciously understand that they are creating psychic attack. And so I see people trying to deal with the person. They'll be saying, you've got to leave me alone, or I don't know, they're trying to deal with it in this 3D kind of reality way, and it's nothing to do with 3D. So what a person has to do, one, I said before, conscious awareness is key. So having a deeper understanding of entity interference in itself, understanding protection, it's not even about that. But two, you have to find the reasons on why those energetics can exist, the reasons on why those interferences can create such harm and deregulation. And there's always an anchor point. There is always an anchor point within the person, right? And potentially it could even be something like, I don't know, giving away rights. Maybe they've made agreements with these spiritual teachings and they have to rescind them, or that's kind of a basic form. But what I see time and time again is it's never about that one incident. I guarantee if you have continual entity interference, or you have a situation like this, it will simply be a repeat of energetics. Remember I talked about at the start, and I said about how your energy, it almost holds these connection points. It's almost like coding in your energetic field. You have to realign or rewrite the coding. And there's always an origination. There's always a starting place. And what I find with people is when I talk with them and hear their stories, I will hear the origination, or when I go to do healing work for someone. And what I love about entity interference, it's not really entity interference that I love the stories behind it. because a lot of the time people are amazed at these anchor points. And generally it could be like, even, I don't know, you may have soul interplays, soul stories from birth, from conception, but most of the time there is this anchoring solidified in somebody's connection through parental kind of dynamics, guardian dynamics. So our parents are meant to be our gatekeepers until we're 16. So if there's abuse, if there's neglect, if there is even like kind of darkness, mental health instability, a whole lot of different things, right? We are conditioned from childhood. It's just the way child development works. It's the way the brain development works. And so you can have these interplays that you've almost, you can have rulings that, I don't know, even like dark energy could be allowed to manipulate your energetic templates. Entity interference could be allowed to create ownership because your parents were meant to gatekeep, but they were filled with a whole lot of kind of dark entity interference, especially if there's like abuse, if there's addiction. So when I work with people, I'm always interested to hear that backstory, because there's these other points that need healed, need realigned to stop this repeat in energetics from replaying. And so in my book, it talks about all the entity interference, all of the different types. There's vast different types, but there's lots of different attachment mechanisms, and that's the more important story. And so what I've, been told by a lot of people is that as they read this book and this information, correct information, right? Not, fabrications. There's so much misalignment and mistruths in the marketplace because people don't understand it in that in-depth way. So by understanding it, one, but two, I wrote the book almost to be like a gateway book, an activation book. I know for me, there was points in my journey where I read certain information and it almost brought this reawakening within me. It's like something stirred and I went, oh my God, that's the missing piece. Or it's usually the next piece, the next piece, the next piece, because unlocking self is a journey, is a progression, especially when it comes to entity interference. And so, I've had a lot of people reach out and say, just by looking at that information, it made them understand, one, their own journey, because it's quite horrible. Even psychic attack, who can you tell? Who can you tell that's actually going to believe you? I remember for me, wow, I was losing my mind at a rapid rate. Actually, sorry, let me just quickly touch on this again. If this is something that you're dealing with, if you don't understand entity interference and anything I say here resonates, then please look at purchasing my book. The details are in the show notes, but also if you're a healer and you want to upskill and you want to work with the highest levels of healing and elevation, you have to work with the highest levels of entity interference to be able to even make that possible. But for me, I know, oh my God, I know I was losing my mind at a rapid rate. And I want to tell you right now that fears and those types of associations, PTSD pathways in the brain getting activated, they create more and more places for interference to manipulate and to attach to. Because one of the biggest attachment mechanisms is actually the brain, right? A lot of spiritual teachings just talk about, let's just bypass the brain, the mind, and let's just sit in our heart space. Well, no, if you've got these places where they're attached to you, have to actually heal neurological structures in alignment with up-leveling, in alignment with entity release, in alignment with all of these things to actually change your reality, to actually create a new path progression forward. But for myself, I was losing myself at the most fastest rate possible. I don't know. It was kind of awful to even for me for a long time to even recount my journey. It actually made me, go, oh my God, I don't actually know how I got through, to be honest. And I didn't really have anyone that could help me because no one understood entity interference. and I just was suffering so badly, and I had teachers, but they didn't really understand. And in fact, one of my mentors was actually a source of huge corruption for me. So that was a whole nother story in itself, that I would turn up to receive help and healing, but there was just this compromise in the background, and it just didn't make sense. But probably one of the pinnacles for me was I actually had something attached to me at a physical body level. And it was manipulating my thoughts, and it's like I couldn't even trust my own connection, and I was just, oh my God. Even my husband at one point just thought that he was going to have to take me to a mental hospital. I'm actually amazed I didn't end up there, to be honest. I'm really proud of myself. As I was writing that book, it really just made me reflect and say, oh my God, like the things that I had to go through. And I just kept stepping up and, going through it and working it out. And then now here I am, yay, to help other people understand it, one, but also I do teach and I do help people master that. I teach them what I know and how to work safely, because safely is the key in those realms. Because believe me, even trying to engage and work with those fields of energies, entities in itself can be really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have the right technique, if you don't have governance and spiritual authority. But at one stage I had something attached to actually in my physical body, so that's classed as possession. Sometimes I don't know how much to say because I don't really want to scare people, but I guess if you're watching information about psychic attack, you probably understand all that's kind of possible. But it felt like I was being eaten alive. It's exactly how it felt. And I dropped about 6 kgs within even a couple of weeks. And I remember we were going back to New Zealand for a holiday to see my family. And I had friends that wanted to catch up, and I was actually not even wanting to step out in the world. Kind of had to try and become a bit of a recluse to deal with it, because at that point in time I had actually developed a phobia around having to deal with these energies, and I didn't understand what brought them on, how they could attach, and it was just endless. So my journey of discovery was vast, because there were things that were coming from other entities and other interferences, like I said, even this mentor, that I had exceptional kind of soul gifts, and this energy had seen this in me and almost wanted to take it for themselves. So at the end of the day, entity interference is generally about gifts. Very high multidimensional interferences will siphon energetics, but they also claim unclaimed gifts. What do I mean by that? It's almost like you've got this ability, this power, this potential. You're not actually utilizing it. You're not stepping into it. You're not owning it. So it's kind of up for grabs. And generally, the psychic attack comes through another person, another relationship, but it's really the high multidimensional influence that is actually cutting in and almost taking resources. Let's kind of call it that. It's a way to explain it. And so for me, this was a big part of my story. The main interference that I had with psychic attack, it took me a very long time to unravel it and kind of get out of it. But I will also say there was also things that I was doing that I didn't understand. So things like people can have a lot of unconscious beliefs and programs that you've got to unwind. So all of these things become places for attachment. Any kind of fear-based programs, fear-based kind of paradigms. Again, it's all in the book. Sometimes it's quite hard to explain because it's so multi-dimensional, right? Mind, body, soul recovery with entity interference, but people don't talk about that. They just talk about entities at this higher realm. No, there's always this interlink on all levels. There's always a representation at a physical body, at a mind and neurological level, and then at a higher soul reordering. So you've almost got to look at it all in its entirety to be able to dismantle it, and you've got to understand why it's there in the first place. But there was another time with I do all my healing work through something called energetic surrogacy. And as I was going through that journey, that was also something that I was, doing and working with energy in that way. And I started seeing a lot of interference, right? And because I had started to have the skills to start releasing things, believe me, I was working with entities that didn't really have the upliving or the power or the spiritual authority or the governance that I have created in myself now. But at that point in time, I could see this interference. And people create they don't create good rules for themselves, put it that way. It's actually detrimental. So your gifts can actually become really dysfunctional. So often people have this amazing ability, but they haven't managed it correctly and they've almost lost control of it. And that can also feel like psychic attack, but it's really about re-establishing rules and the correct kind of polarity to gifts and to connections. So, I was doing things like my kids' friends were turning up to my house. So to put it into context, as I was working, I started my journey, advanced holistic kinesiology. I was doing that. I did a whole lot of soul training. I had a whole lot of skills. And part of that journey for me was I started working with my kids were too little to kind of lie on a table and do healing work for them. So I learned a technique that was almost bringing people's energy, so their energy into my body and working through myself as a surrogate. And I worked in this way for quite a while. And so because I was releasing things for them, it's like I was making agreements to kind of release entities for people. And over time doing this more and more, people would turn up to my house, their friends, and I would be like, oh, they've got a lot of entity interference. And then I was like, hang on a minute, if I can see this, maybe it's my job to release these things. Maybe I'm doing a favor here. I'm doing a service. I'm always helping. Oh my God, no, naughtiness. I didn't have permission to work in their field, so I kind of didn't understand some of these key elements with good energetic rules. Let's call it rules. And so I started doing that. And then what happened was it created an energetic program in my energetic field that I will take people's entities. Oh my God. Terrible, terrible program to be running. And it got to the point where I would go out in the world and I would instantly have I would just look at somebody and I'd just have their entities coming to me. So somebody that didn't understand it would call that psychic attack, but it's not psychic attack. It's completely different because I had created that in my own energetic field. And your energy, whatever you kind of focus on or learn or create, will kind of expand because your energy will test things. So it was really my own abilities and my own power creating a huge deregulation. But once again, I was in this world of disempowerment thinking, oh my God, poor me. Why is this happening? Wrong question. If you don't ask the right question, you won't get an answer back. You won't be able to do anything. How did I create this attachment mechanism? There's the right question right there. And so that is one story in hundreds and hundreds of stories that I could tell. But I have people all the time come to me in absolute depletion. Psychic attack will, oh my God, it's scary, terrifying. Put you into overdrive in your central nervous system, in that sympathetic nervous system dominance, into the stress response. And all of a sudden you've got this pathway to cause such decline physically, mentally, and then obviously spiritually. And often people that have huge deregulation with those types of things will be in something called suspended animation. They won't even own their own connection. So there could be rulings. There could be things like any authority figure can kind of overrun my connection points. And that probably started from childhood. Any higher masculine energy has the right to control. Again, it could be a father figure, right? That program has been put in place from childhood. It still runs, but there might be a really kind of high powerful energetic form that holds those types of engagement or elements, and then again it just is feeding into this ruling or this program. Believe me, there's a lot more to it. I don't know, I've seen things like I remember once a lady said that she joined a spiritual group and it was called John the Beloved or something, and a woman was channeling this information. And in the end, I don't know, it didn't feel right. She kind of wanted to get out of it. And as soon as she got out of it, she just was endlessly attacked. And when she came to me and I did work for her, it wasn't John the Beloved. It wasn't a light energy. It was a whole lot of dark interference posing. So spiritual fraud is one of the biggest issues there is in the world. Transference through healing circles, all of these different things. But let's say you know, why was this woman, why are people attracted to false light? There's kind of another great question to ask, because there'll be programs running that potentially they've got light and dark crossed, and that they don't even understand light frequency, because potentially, again, in childhood, maybe they had a parent that, obviously parents are love, stabilization, belonging, connection, all of these things. But if it's laced with mental health instability, things like even alcoholism, drug use, maybe abuse, all of these different things, they hold the foundations for neurological conditioning. And neurological conditioning, again, the neurological or the mind is one of the biggest places that you can have things attach, especially if you don't hold the right meaning and association to something. Each story is unique. This is why there's kind of not one rule, even though, yes, I talk about rules in my book and I talk about all of these things. This is why I love doing this work, because I love uncovering someone's life progression path, their stories. What are the interlinks to them? It's almost like each person has their own kind of narration or representation to these interlinks. So to even label it psychic attack, it kind of washes over what's actually taking place. Where is this actually coming from? Even like I have people all the time that say they had a person that was really hard to deal with, and they just opened their heart and said, I'm just going to open my heart and send them love. Don't do that. Don't do that. You're opening up to all of their interference. You're creating a portal way, maybe at worst a vortex, a gateway, all of these things. And then there's an attachment mechanism. But let's say somebody gets mad with you, right? It's called it's more than just an anger sphere. There's lots of different things for different scenarios. But let's say someone gets mad with you and they think that you've done them wrong. Right? Everybody's just viewing their reality through their own lens, right? So everybody has a different meaning or a different context, regardless of what the situation was. And so if you hold guilt or shame, or what was your role that you played, if you have any of those kind of lack modeling or associations, that is an attachment mechanism in itself. So whenever there's a relationship dynamic that holds interference, it's never about the other person. It is always what that represents to you. You have to look at those interplays. You have to heal those. You have to realign those. And that, it's about disconnecting rather than kind of getting rid of it fully. Like, it's just different ways of solidifying your own power, connection, sovereignty. Again, it's always sovereignty. If you don't know what sovereignty means, sovereignty is our right to enact our destiny without interference. So psychic attack, you have to look at the elements that you can control, which is your energetic field, where those representations have originated from. Notice I said originated from, because it won't be that scenario. And we're really just replaying the past if we haven't fully healed in the way that we need to, especially if we weren't in alignment to being our own gatekeeper. Any being could take control of our energetics. And so we have to look at all of these places, take full ownership for ourselves. And that is that re-regulation. And I guess maybe I'll leave it on the last thing. The last thing that I see all the time as well is people endlessly working in past lifetimes. Don't do it. Don't do it. Sometimes some past lifetime information is really relevant, but people kind of hold all these stories, and I don't know. Sometimes it gives them this spiritual importance, let's call it that. There are anchor points in this lifetime. We are here to look at this lifetime. If you're not working in this lifetime, you won't be able to re-regulate neurological up-leveling. And if you can't do neurological up-leveling, you don't actually hold spiritual connection points or spiritual elevation consciousness. So by working in this lifetime, even if it feels like a huge spiritual story, hey, I've got soul gifts and I want to extend it into them, yes. But there is a representation in the 3D realms and that 3D reality that is the expression of these kind of higher soul alignments, and you need to work with this lifetime because that's what we're here to do. And the more that we advance this lifetime, the more that then again it harmonizes past lifetimes. So I just want to be very clear and just say, hey, look, Even sometimes endlessly working in spiritual information can create more deregulation for people. You got to work on this lifetime, and there will be these stories. So please, I did create this book as almost like an understanding, but like I call it also a gateway book. What do I mean by that? There's been parts in my journey where I have read a specific, book, and I've been drawn to it, and I've read it, and it's unlocked almost like a reawakening within me to better understand, because conscious awareness is key when it comes to elevation, spiritual re-regulation, all of these things we have to understand consciously. But it almost creates this foundation or this awareness, and then it's like I've got these new pieces of the puzzle to reorder and to start to work with, and it may create that next step forward. So in my journey, there's been really significant things that, I've been drawn to, and then just with that has really just created that next step. Especially if you feel like you're lost in the darkness, this book will bring light. But I've had a lot of people reach out and say, oh my God, thank you. This book's given me renewed hope, or it's led me to, as I read it, if you read it and you have these aha moments, a reordering moment that you kind of understand, or maybe past memories, associations start to pop up from childhood, they are key points in time to really look at, and to then, it's almost like a place of importance to unwind that story that I'm talking about. So psychic attack is almost like, it's not the cause. It's almost like it's just an expression of a deeper restriction that sits elsewhere at a different point in time, and by looking at the right pieces and realigning the right pieces, that is where you create a new foundation. And it's the foundations that need to be reordered, the sovereignty, the spiritual authority, to solidify a connection that, I don't want to use the word protects it, but it does. It creates lasting kind of it's like expanding your energetics, where a lot of people through attack will kind of almost recoil in themselves, or they shut themselves down. And anything that you kind of do that you're pulling away, shutting down your energetics, it actually hurts more, because it stifles that high spiritual reordering and connection. Anyway, if you've liked this episode, please subscribe or follow. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next episode.